Good morning, everybody. This morning, I wanted to talk to you about the imposter syndrome. Oh, that old fella, the imposter syndrome. Hands up if you have the imposter syndrome. I imagine that 80 to 90% of you are popping your hands up right about now, at least mentally anyway. And the reason I wanted to talk about it is because, well, I talk about it a lot in my first book, First Lead Yourself. It's just another way of saying that I'm not enough. I don't feel like I'm enough. And I'm out of my depth a little bit. Now, when I work with clients, one of the first questions I ask, and the reasoning behind this question is a little bit different to the question itself, but I'll explain. So the question I ask is, what do you look to get out of a job or a career? And inevitably, the majority of people tell me that it's they're feeling like they're adding value, they're surrounded by good people, they want to be challenged, they get to use their skills, all that type of thing. Never. And the reason I ask that question is I'm looking for what their motivations are. Do they move towards things or do they move away from things? So, for example, I don't want to be stuck in a dead-end job. Well, that's moving away from something. Whereas if I want to be purposeful and add value, that's moving towards something. But anyway, that aside, no one ever has told me that they want an easy, laid-back, relaxed kind of career in a job where they're not stressed or they're not challenged. And why that's important to remember is if you think about the imposter syndrome, well, largely people would describe that they feel like they're out of their depth. And what that tells me is that really they're learning. They're in a position where the learning curve is quite steep and they haven't quite mastered their current role. Isn't that absolutely fantastic? Isn't that exactly where you want to be? So think about if you do feel like you have the imposter syndrome, do you really have it? Or are you just putting a label on something where you absolutely need to be? You're stretched, you're being challenged, you're learning, you're growing. Because for the majority of people, when they get into a role and they've mastered that role, it becomes quite boring. It becomes quite monotonous. And then they start looking for a new challenge. And then that whole feeling of imposter syndrome kind of kicks in again. So have a think about it. How can you reframe what imposter syndrome actually means? Are you just learning and growing? And are you exactly where you need to be?